The emergency comm crackled to life at 0347 hours, ship time. Captain Elena Vasquez bolted upright in her bunk aboard the mining vessel Iron Will, her heart already racing before her mind caught up. "Mom?" The voice was small, scared, barely audible, through the static. "Mom, where are you?" Elena's blood turned to ice. That was her daughter's voice. Her 8-year-old daughter Sophia, who should have been safe in their quarters on Kepler Station, 3 systems away, but the transmission wasn't coming from Kepler Station. "Sophia? Baby, where are you?" Elena's fingers flew over her personal comm unit, trying to trace the signal. Her hands shook as the readings made no sense. The transmission was coming from deep space, somewhere in the Vega sector, a region that had gone dark 6 months ago. The Zephyrian Empire had claimed it was a routine pacification operation. No human ships allowed, no exceptions. "Mom, it's dark here. There are things with big eyes. They took us from the station. They said humans are good for—" The transmission cut to static. Elena stared at the comm unit, her world collapsing. The Zephyrians had taken civilian stations. They had taken her daughter. Every instinct screamed at her to run toward danger, to tear apart space itself to find Sophia. But she was just one woman on a mining ship, facing an empire that spanned 40 star systems. She activated the ship's intercom. "All hands to the mess hall, now." 12 faces looked up at her. Tough miners, ex-military, people who'd chosen the hard life of deep space because they didn't fit anywhere else. Elena had worked with most of them for years. They were family. "The Zephyrians have taken human civilians," she said without preamble. "Children, my daughter among them. I'm going to get them back." The silence stretched for long seconds. Then Jake Morrison, her chief engineer and former Marine sergeant, stood up. "What's the plan, Captain?" Elena felt tears threaten, but pushed them down. "I don't have one yet, but I know this. The Iron Will has military-grade shields we installed, for asteroid work. She's tough, and we're tougher." "Elena," said Dr. Sarah Chen, the ship's medic and former Navy flight surgeon, "the Zephyrian Empire has a fleet of 10,000 ships. They've conquered species across half the galaxy. We're talking about beings that breathe methane and see in 12 different spectrums. Their smallest destroyer could vaporize us. Then we won't give them the chance." Elena's voice carried a cold fury that made everyone lean forward. "They think humans are weak because we're young, because we only just reached the stars 50 years ago. They think we're cattle." She activated the main display, showing the last known positions of Zephyrian fleet elements. "They're wrong, and I'm going to prove it." What Elena didn't say, what she couldn't say yet, was that her anger was already changing into something else, something calculating and deadly. As she looked at the tactical display, her mind wasn't seeing impossible odds. She was seeing weak points, supply lines, communication delays across vast distances. She was seeing how an empire that large would never expect a single mining ship to declare war on them all. Elena's first target wasn't a warship or a fortress. It was a supply depot orbiting a dead moon, in the Arcturus system, barely defended, packed with fuel and ammunition for the Zephyrian expansion fleet. The Iron Will dropped out of FTL at the system's edge, running silent. On paper, she was still a mining vessel. Her transponder broadcast the correct codes for a routine mineral survey. Nothing to alarm the 2 patrol ships guarding the depot. "Remember," Elena whispered into her comm as her crew took positions, "Zephyrians have better sensors than us, but they think in patterns. They expect enemies to announce themselves, to follow rules of engagement. We're not going to do either." The mining ship drifted closer, looking for all the world like she was scanning asteroids. The Zephyrian patrols barely glanced at her readings. That was their first mistake. Elena had spent 3 weeks studying every piece of Zephyrian technology they'd salvaged over the years. She knew their shield frequencies, their communication protocols, their weapon signatures. More importantly, she knew they'd never faced an enemy that fought dirty. At 2,000 kilometers, the Iron Will suddenly accelerated to ramming speed. But instead of aiming for the depot, Elena aimed for the gap between the 2 patrol ships. The Zephyrians barely had time to register the threat before Elena fired everything she had. Not at their hulls, but at the space between them. Mining charges designed to break apart asteroids detonated in a chain reaction, filling the space with superheated debris and electromagnetic interference. In the chaos, the two patrol ships couldn't see each other, couldn't communicate, couldn't coordinate. Elena's crew worked like demons. Jake Morrison launched their mining drones, each one now carrying military explosives cobbled together from their supplies. Dr. Chen jammed Zephyrian communications with a virus she'd coded based on their stolen technical manuals. Within minutes, both patrol ships were crippled, their engines dead, their weapons offline. But Elena wasn't interested in prisoners or glory. She was interested in information. The Iron Will latched onto the depot like a parasite. Elena's boarding team, miners, with jury-rigged weapons and 30 years of experience working in the vacuum, cut through the hull in minutes. Zephyrians weren't built for close combat. In their environmental suits, they moved like arthritic crabs. Elena's people moved like wolves. It took 20 minutes to secure the depot, another hour to crack their computer systems. And then Elena found what she was looking for. "Captain," Jake's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "You need to see this." The data files painted a picture that made Elena's blood boil. The Zephyrians hadn't just taken her daughter. They'd taken thousands of humans from dozens of stations across 3 systems. Men, women, children, all destined for what the files coldly called biological experimentation and psychological conditioning studies. But the files also revealed something else: the location of the research facility where the humans were being held, and the complete patrol schedules for the next month. As the Iron Will undocked from the ruined depot, Elena felt a cold smile spread across her face. The Zephyrians thought they were dealing with primitive barbarians who would cry for help to their government, who would file protests through proper diplomatic channels. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a mother who would burn down the galaxy to save her child. The patrol ship's emergency beacons were already broadcasting distress calls. Soon, the entire Zephyrian fleet would know that someone had attacked their supply line. Let them come, Elena thought. She had plans for them too. The Zephyrian response was swift and overwhelming. Within 6 hours, a battle group of 23 ships had arrived at the depot, led by War Commander Zithak aboard the heavy cruiser Crushing Tide. What they found defied explanation. The depot was intact but completely stripped of supplies. The 2 patrol ships floated dead in space, their crews alive but their ship's computer cores surgically removed, and carved into the depot's hull in letters 30 meters high were words in perfect Zephyrian script. "Give us back our children, War Commander." Zithak studied the message through his ship's sensors, his 4 eyes narrowing in confusion. In 300 years of conquest, no species had ever made demands of the Zephyrian Empire. "Analysis," he commanded. "War Commander, the attack pattern suggests a single ship, possibly a converted freighter. Estimated crew of 15 to 20 individuals. The precision of the operation indicates military training, but the tactics are unusual." Zithak's translator crackled. "Unusual how?" "They didn't attempt to destroy our ships or kill our personnel. They disabled and robbed them. This suggests either weakness or..." The sensor operator hesitated. "Or what?" "Or they wanted us to know they had been here." Before Zithak could respond, proximity alarms screamed throughout the ship. Dozens of objects had just dropped out of FTL at the system's edge, moving fast, no transponder signals, heading directly for the battle group. "Impossible," Zithak breathed. "No human ship can achieve those acceleration curves." He was right. No human ship could. But Elena hadn't brought ships. The Iron Will had spent the last 6 hours in the asteroid belt, working frantically. Elena's miners had done what they did best. They'd moved rock. Lots of rock. Using their industrial equipment, they'd attached crude FTL drives to 17 asteroids, each one the size of a city block. The drives were one-way only, cannibalized from the depot's spare parts, but they only needed to work once. "Evasive maneuvers," Zithak commanded, but the asteroids weren't aiming for his ships. They were aiming for the empty space around them. The asteroids detonated simultaneously, each one packed with mining charges and scavenged ammunition. The explosions created a debris field that stretched across millions of cubic kilometers, a maze of metal fragments moving at significant fractions of light speed. Zithak's battle group was trapped in a blender made of shrapnel and death. 3. Ships died immediately, their hulls shredded by debris they couldn't see coming. The others raised their shields and tried to move to clear space, but every direction they turned brought more obstacles. That's when the iron will struck again. Elena had been watching from the edge of the debris field, using the chaos to mask her approach. The mining ship dove into the maelstrom like a shark, her reinforced hull shrugging off impacts that would have destroyed a military vessel. She wasn't trying to win a stand-up fight. She was hunting. The first Zephyrian destroyer never saw her coming. Elena's ship latched onto its hull and her crew went to work with shaped charges, opening the ship like a can. By the time the crew realized they were being boarded, Elena's miners were already inside, moving through the corridors with the efficiency of people who'd spent their lives working in hostile environments. Zephyrians were stronger than humans individually, but they'd never fought an enemy that used their own ship's layout against them, that moved through maintenance shafts and emergency airlocks like they owned the place. Within an hour, Elena had captured 3 ships and destroyed 2 more. The remaining Zephyrians fled, leaving behind their damaged vessels and their dead. But Elena wasn't finished. She now had Zephyrian military vessels, Zephyrian weapons, and most importantly, Zephyrian crew members who could answer questions. As the Iron Will towed her prizes toward the next phase of her plan, Elena stood on the bridge and looked at the tactical display. The Zephyrians controlled hundreds of systems, commanded millions of ships. But they'd made one critical error. They'd threatened a human's child, and now they were going to learn why that was a mistake. Elena's interrogation of the captured Zephyrian crew revealed something the Empire hadn't expected any primitive species to understand. Their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. The Zephyrian Empire was vast, spanning 43 star systems, but it was held together by a complex network of communication relays, supply lines, and administrative protocols that had been refined over centuries of conquest. It was efficient, it was logical, it was predictable, and Elena was going to use it to tear them apart. The research facility holding the human prisoners was located in the Vega Prime system, heavily defended by 3 battle fleets. A direct assault would be suicide, but Elena wasn't planning a direct assault. She was planning something much worse. "Jake, what's the status on those Zephyrian ships?" Elena asked as the Iron Will drifted in the shadow of a gas giant's moon. "Operational, Captain. Their crews are cooperative." Jake's smile was grim. The Zephyrians had talked once they realized their captors weren't interested in torture or glory. Just information. The humans had been coldly professional, almost businesslike in their questioning. It had scared them more than any threat could have. "Good. Sarah, how's the virus coming?" Dr. Chen looked up from her workstation, where she'd been dissecting Zephyrian communication protocols for 3 days straight. "It's beautiful, Elena. Their entire network runs on trust protocols. They never expected anyone to understand their systems well enough to hack them. One ship with proper authentication codes can access their entire supply database." Elena nodded. The plan was insane, but it was the kind of insane that might actually work. The Zephyrian Empire controlled their vast territory through a carefully orchestrated dance of supply convoys, patrol schedules, and communication updates. Every ship knew exactly where it was supposed to be, exactly what it was supposed to be doing. Elena was about to introduce chaos into that perfect system. Using the captured Zephyrian vessel, Spine of Conquest, Elena's team inserted themselves into the Empire's communication network. To any observer, they appeared to be a legitimate patrol vessel checking in with standard status reports. But the reports they filed were carefully crafted lies. They reported pirate attacks that didn't exist, forcing patrol fleets to investigate empty systems. They requisitioned massive supply shipments to non-existent bases, creating shortages across entire sectors. They filed maintenance requests that sent repair ships to the wrong coordinates, leaving them stranded in deep space. Most devastatingly, they began altering fleet movement orders. "Admiral Kothar's Third Fleet is being redirected to investigate a false emergency in the Centauri sector," Dr. Chen reported. "That's 47 ships pulled away from Vega Prime. Battle Group Epsilon is chasing phantoms in the Outer Rim," Jake added. "We've got them running in circles." But Elena saved the most elegant touch for last. She began filing reports of a massive human fleet massing for an attack on the Empire's capital system. The reports came from multiple sources, all seemingly independent, all painting a picture of humanity finally mobilizing for war. The Zephyrian High Command did exactly what Elena had hoped they would do. They began consolidating their scattered fleets into massive defensive formations around their most important systems, which left the Vega Prime system defended by exactly one battle fleet instead of 3. Those were odds Elena could work with. But, as the Iron Will and her captured escorts prepared to jump to Vega Prime, Elena received a transmission on a frequency she'd almost forgotten. "Mom?" Sophia's voice was weak, frightened, but alive. "Mom, are you coming? The things here, they're doing bad things to people. I'm scared." Elena closed her eyes, feeling rage and love war in her chest. "I'm coming, baby. Mommy's coming." What she didn't tell her daughter was that she wasn't coming alone. Word of Elena's campaign had spread through the human colonies like wildfire. Mining ships, cargo haulers, even luxury yachts were converging on her position. Most had no weapons, no military training, no business in a war zone. But they all had one thing in common. They were parents, siblings, spouses of the people the Zephyrians had taken, and they were done asking nicely for their families back. The battle for Vega Prime began at 0600 hours, ship time, when Elena's ragtag fleet dropped out of FTL at the system's edge. What the Zephyrian defenders saw on their sensors should have been reassuring. 37 human vessels, mostly converted civilian ships, facing off against Battle Fleet Primus. 83 ships of the line commanded by Admiral Vexthul, aboard the dreadnought World Breaker. The odds were overwhelming in the Zephyrians' favor. Admiral Vexthul had fought in 73 campaigns and never suffered a defeat. His ships were faster, more heavily armed, crewed by warriors who had conquered half a galaxy. He was about to learn that conquest and war were very different things. Elena's attack came in 3 waves, each one more devastating than the last. The first wave wasn't ships at all. It was cargo containers, thousands of them, jettisoned from the human fleet and accelerated to significant fractions of light speed using mining charges. Each container held refined uranium from mining operations, creating radioactive shotgun blasts that turned space itself into a weapon. The Zephyrian ships raised their shields and weathered the storm, but their formations were broken, their sensors blinded by radioactive interference. That's when the second wave struck. Elena had learned from her earlier battles, the human ships didn't attack as a fleet, they attacked as individuals, each one following its own path through the chaos. Mining vessels used their reinforced hulls to ram through Zephyrian formations. Cargo ships became guided missiles, piloted by volunteers who'd already said their goodbyes. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting not a battle, but a brawl. Their superior tactics meant nothing when their enemies ignored every rule of engagement, when human ships rammed them at full speed or self-destructed to take out multiple targets. But the third wave was the most terrifying of all. Elena had kept the Iron Will and her captured Zephyrian escorts in reserve, waiting for the perfect moment. When Admiral Vexthul's flagship moved to coordinate the defense, Elena struck from the blind spot his own ships had created. The Iron Will used Zephyrian IFF codes to approach the World Breaker undetected. By the time Admiral Vexthul realized, the friendly ship on his sensors was actually his enemy. Elena's boarding pods were already attached to his hull. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. Elena had selected her boarding team carefully. Every member had lost family to the Zephyrians. Every member had spent weeks training in captured Zephyrian ships, learning their layouts, their weaknesses, their blind spots. They moved through the World Breaker like a plague, using maintenance, shafts and emergency passages the ship's own crew had forgotten existed. Zephyrian warriors found themselves ambushed in their own corridors, cut down by enemies who struck from shadows and vanished like ghosts. Elena herself led the assault on the bridge, moving with a cold precision that terrified even her own people. She'd stopped thinking of the Zephyrians as intelligent beings. They were obstacles between her and her daughter, nothing more. Admiral Vexthul made his last stand in his command center, surrounded by his most elite guards. He was a warrior who had lived for battle, who had expected to die with honor. He died begging for mercy from a human woman who had none left to give. With their flagship captured and their admiral dead, the remaining Zephyrian ships broke formation and fled. Elena let them go. She had what she'd come for, the location of the research facility. But as the surviving human ships regrouped around their prizes, Elena received a transmission that made her blood freeze. It was from Zephyrian High Command, transmitted on all frequencies. To the human animals who have dared attack the Zephyrian Empire, your actions have consequences. For every ship you destroy, we will execute 100 of your people. For every warrior you kill, we will kill 1,000. The transmission included video footage from the research facility. Humans in cages, humans being led to execution chambers, humans screaming as they died. Elena watched her species being slaughtered and felt something break inside her chest. She'd thought she was angry before. She'd been wrong. Now she was going to show the Zephyrians what real anger looked like. All ships, she broadcast to her fleet. We're not going to the research facility first. We're going to the Zephyrian homeworld. Captain, Jake's voice was careful. Their homeworld is defended by over 1,000 ships. It's suicide. Elena smiled, and the expression made everyone on the bridge take a step back. Then, they'll never see us coming. The Zephyrian homeworld of Zeftar had not seen war in over 500 years. Protected by the Imperial Defense Fleet, 1,200 ships arranged in concentric shells around the system, it was considered impregnable. The planet itself was a monument to conquest, its cities built from the spoils of 100 subjugated worlds. 12 billion Zephyrians lived in luxury supported by the labor of enslaved species across the galaxy. None of them expected to die screaming in their beds. Elena's final assault began 3 days before she arrived in the system. Using the captured Zephyrian communication networks, she began transmitting false intelligence reports throughout the Empire. Phantom human fleets were massing everywhere, in the outer rim, near the core systems, in empty space between stars. The Zephyrian High Command, already rattled by Elena's impossible victories, began pulling ships from the homeworld's defense fleet to investigate these phantom threats. By the time Elena's real fleet arrived at Zeftar, the impregnable defense fleet had been reduced to 600 ships. Still impossible odds, still certain death for any conventional fleet. But Elena hadn't brought a conventional fleet. She'd brought a swarm. Word of the Zephyrian atrocities had spread throughout human space like wildfire. The video of humans being executed had been broadcast on every network, shown on every screen. And humanity had responded with something the galaxy had never seen before. Total war. Every human ship capable of FTL travel had converged on Elena's position. Mining vessels from the outer colonies, corporate, freighters from the core worlds, even pleasure craft from Earth itself, their holds packed with homemade explosives and their crews armed with whatever weapons they could find. 3,000 ships strong, the human fleet dropped out of FTL in the Zeftar system like a plague of locusts. The Zephyrian defenders opened fire immediately, their advanced weapons cutting through the first wave of human ships like paper. Hundreds died in the first minutes of the battle. But for every human ship that died, 2 more took its place, and they weren't trying to win a conventional battle. They were trying to get close enough to hurt the enemy. Cargo ships used their massive bulk as battering rams, smashing through Zephyrian formations before detonating their holds. Mining vessels deployed clouds of metallic chaff that blinded sensors and fouled targeting systems. Even the smallest craft carried enough explosives to cripple a destroyer. The Zephyrian fleet found itself drowning in targets, overwhelmed by sheer numbers and suicidal determination. Their superior technology meant nothing when facing an enemy that treated their own lives as just another weapon. But Elena saved the most devastating attack for herself. While the main battle raged in the outer system, Elena took the Iron Will and a handful of captured Zephyrian ships on a different route. Using the planet's own orbital infrastructure to mask their approach, they dove toward Zeftar's surface like meteors. The planetary defense grid opened fire, but Elena's ships were transmitting proper Zephyrian IFF codes. By the time the defenders realized they were shooting at their own vessels, Elena was already in the atmosphere. The Iron Will screamed through Zeftar's skies, her hull glowing white-hot from atmospheric friction. Elena's target wasn't a military installation or government building. It was the planet's primary power grid. Zeftar's cities were powered by a network of fusion reactors connected by a planetary energy distribution system. Elena had studied the schematics captured from Zephyrian databases, looking for the single point of failure that would bring the entire network down. She found it in the main distribution hub located beneath the capital city. The Iron Will didn't try to land. She simply crashed, her reinforced hull driving deep into the planet's crust like a nail into wood. Elena and her crew rode the ship down into the depths of Zeftar, using the impact itself as their weapon. The explosion that followed lit up half the planet. The fusion network overloaded in a cascade failure that raced across the world at the speed of light. Cities went dark. Life support systems failed. Transportation grids collapsed. 12 billion Zephyrians found themselves trapped in the darkness, their perfect world suddenly as fragile as paper. But Elena wasn't finished. From the wreckage of the Iron Will, she transmitted a message on all Zephyrian frequencies. Her face appeared on every screen that still had power. Her voice echoed from every speaker that still functioned. "You took our children," she said simply. "Now watch your world die." The message was broadcast throughout the galaxy, carried by the same networks the Zephyrians used to coordinate their empire. Every species they had conquered, every world they had enslaved, saw the impossible sight of the Zephyrian homeworld in flames. And they began to realize that the galaxy's greatest predators were not invincible after all. The rescue of the human prisoners from the research facility was almost anticlimactic after the destruction of Zeftar. With their homeworld in ruins and half their fleet destroyed, the Zephyrian Empire collapsed in on itself like a dying star. Elena found Sophia in a cell barely large enough for a human child, malnourished and traumatized, but alive. The reunion was everything she had fought for. Tears and desperate hugs and whispered promises that they would never be separated again. But the war had changed Elena in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Mom," Sophia whispered, as they sat together. "In the medical bay of a rescue ship, everyone's calling you a hero. They say you saved everyone." Elena stroked her daughter's hair and stared out at the stars. 3 star systems had fallen in the span of 2 months. The most powerful empire in the galaxy had been brought to its knees by a single mining ship and a mother's determination. But the cost had been terrible. Thousands of humans had died in the final battle. Entire worlds had been left without power or government. The galaxy's political structure was collapsing into chaos as subjugated species rose up against their former masters. "Heroes don't exist, baby," Elena said softly. "There are just people who do what has to be done." The aftermath was swift and brutal. Without the iron grip of Zephyrian control, dozens of species began settling old scores. Trade networks collapsed. War spread like wildfire across systems that had known peace for centuries. And through it all, humanity emerged as something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that would burn down civilization itself to protect their own. The other races watched in fascination and terror as human ships patrolled the former Zephyrian territories, not as conquerors, but as guardians. They imposed no governments, demanded no tribute, established no colonies. They simply made it clear that certain lines could not be crossed. Elena became something between a legend and a nightmare story. The human who had declared war on an empire and won. Diplomatic missions from across the galaxy came to negotiate with her, offering alliance treaties and trade agreements. She turned them all down. "We don't want your empires," she told the assembled ambassadors in a speech that would be remembered for centuries. "We don't want to rule you or conquer you. We just want to be left alone to raise our children in peace." She paused, and her smile made even the bravest diplomats shiver. "But if you threaten our families again, if you take our children, if you try to make us slaves, then remember what happened to the Zephyrians. Remember that we are a species that would rather die than kneel. And remember that there are 4 billion more of us where I came from." The speech became known as the Vasquez Doctrine, and it defined humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity would not seek empire, but neither would they tolerate aggression. They had proven they were capable of destroying civilizations. The galaxy's other species decided it was better to keep them as friends. Years later, Elena retired to a small farm on a colony world, where she raised Sophia and tried to forget the sound of dying ships and burning worlds. But sometimes, late at night, she would look up at the stars and remember the lesson she had taught the galaxy. Never threaten a human's child. Because humans, it turned out, were not the civilized species everyone had expected them to become. They were something far more dangerous. A species that valued family above empires, love above logic, and who would sacrifice everything for the people they cared about. The galaxy was still learning to live with that reality. And it always would be.